Denudation Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
Okay, you are welcome again to Future Mobile e-learning, a geography class to be precise. Now we are going to look at denudational processes. When we are talking about denudation, we are talking about the word weathering. Weathering. Weathering is defined as the breaking and the disintegration of rocks into smaller pieces. The breaking down and disintegration of rocks. In fact, at your age, this is a senior class. When we are talking about rocks, we should, divulge our minds from a big Zuma rock that we have in Niger State, or the Olomo rocks that we have, or any other. So when we are talking about the disintegration and breaking down of rocks, that is called weathering. Soil is also part of rocks. Remember, when we're looking at the structure of the earth, we talk about the domains of the earth. Number one, we have the lithosphere. We say this the solid parts of the what? Of the earth. So that lithosphere form the rocks. The rocks. So when these rocks begin to disintegrate, begin to wear and tear, begin to break down into pieces, we call what? Weathering. And in weathering, three things happen. Number one, we have the erosion. Number two, we have the transportation. Number three, we have the deposition. Once a material is being weathered by the agent of denudation, what happens? The material will be, eroded, it will be transported, and it will be deposited. In the course of erosion, transportation, and deposition, they lead to landform development. Remember, this landform development can be visible, others may not be visible. But what we are saying here is that when we talk about denudational processes, what we are talking about is weathering. And we say it is the breaking down, the disintegrated of rocks into smaller pieces. And once these rocks are being disintegrated, they are being transported, eroded, and deposited. Then we are going to look at factors that affect weathering. Factors that affect weathering. Factors that encourage weathering to take place. Number one, we have climatic elements. The climatic element like rainfall, climatic element like temperature, climatic element like wind, climatic element like atmospheric pressure. Where we have high, activities of this climatic element, it will encourage what we call a denudational process or weathering. What do I mean? For instance, climatic element like rainfall, continuous rainfall, heavy downpour of rainfall can weaken the rocks, and thereby it can lead to easy breaking of rocks into what? Into smaller pieces. And once this is done, this is what we call weathering. Or when we have high temperature, when we have high temperature in the day and low temperature in the night, that is alternate temperature. In the afternoon very high, in the night very cold. When a rock is being subjected to these alternate changes in temperature as an element of climate, it can weaken the structure and the texture of the rock, and that rock can be disintegrated and broken into pieces. Weathering has taken place. So when we talk about climatic elements, it encourages weathering. Then number two, the types and nature of rocks itself. There are some rocks that are hard, like igneous rock, but there are some rocks that are soft, like sedimentary rocks. So in an environment where it's made majorly of sedimentary rocks that are soft, it will encourage the action of denudation or weathering. But in an environment where we have igneous rock, hard and resistant to any act of breakage, it will not encourage weathering. Then number 3, we look at relief. Relief is also part of what? Of factors that encourage weathering. Where we have a steeper slope, weathering can be more pronounced than where we have a gentle slope. Then finally, we have a living organism. Here we have plants and animals. Animals like cow, they can use their hoofs to break down the rocks. That shows that weathering has taken place. But or some microorganisms, like, or some insects, or some organisms within the soil, like earthworm, they can penetrate into what? Into a rock, thereby weaken the structure of the rock. Like man, farming activities, also breaking down of rocks because of an attempt to farm. These can lead to or encourage what we call denudation. In summary, what we are saying here is that denudation or weathering is the breaking or disintegration of rocks into smaller pieces. And once these rocks are broken down, they are carried from that point to another point in form of erosion, in form of transportation, and finally deposited. Now, they can be carried by water, they can be carried by wave, they can be carried by air, and they can even be carried by action of ice or glacier. Then what are the factors that encourage weathering? We have discussed them. Climatic element like temperature, like rainfall, like even wind encourage, when wind carry a very heavy substance and hit it on a rock, it can encourage what? Speed up the denudational activities. So now we are going to look at the types of weathering. Now we are taking into consideration the definition of weathering and the factors that encourage weathering. Now we are going to look at the types of weathering. Number 1, we have 2 types of weathering anyway. We have the physical weathering and we have the chemical weathering. The physical weathering. Under the physical weathering, we have temperature changes. It's number 1. I'm going to explain them. Alternative wetting and drying. We have frost action and we have action of plants and animals. I want us to look at the explanation very well, because each of these factors or type happen in a certain climatic environment. For instance, let's start from number 1, temperature changes as a factor or type of weathering. Number 1, physical weathering. Remember, when we are talking about weathering, is the disintegration of what? Of rocks into a smaller pieces. And these rocks that are being disintegrated, they are moved, carried from one point to another. I'm stressing this because this also will lead us to the following topic after we have finished this one. That is called mass wasting. That is movement of these weathered materials. Now, number 1, we look at physical weathering. How does physical weathering happen? It happens under this condition. Number 1, temperature changes. Temperature changes is in an arid environment where the difference between temperature in the afternoon and in the night is very wide. In the afternoon, the temperature will be very high. Then in the night, the temperature will go down very low, continuously in and out every day. The rocks will be expanded in the afternoon as a result of high temperature. In the night, this rock will contrast, will shrink. This continuous expansion and contraction can lead to, the structure of the rock being altered. It can lead to the peeling of rocks, and this type of peeling is what we call exfoliation. So you can get to, in an arid environment or in a place like a semi-arid or arid environment where we have high temperature in the afternoon, in the daytime and in the night, you see some rocks that are just peeling, have their surface very smoothing. This process of peeling of rocks as a result of changes in temperature is what we call exfoliation. The peeled materials is called talus, while the rocks that peeled itself and make the surface very smooth is what we call exfoliation doom. So this is how temperature, encourage weathering under physical weathering. Then number 2, alternate wetting and drying. This one happen in a tropical environment where we have high temperature plus high rainfall. But in the terms or in the case of temperature changes, it happen in an arid or semi-arid environment where the amount of rainfall does not correspond with the amount of temperature. But in a tropic environment, we have high temperature and high rainfall. This, during rainy season, what happens? The rock will absorb water and it will swell on. But during dry season, this rock will now contrast. The rainy season, it will take enough water and expand. Dry season, this rock the water will escape. This alternate wetting and drying can cause the rock to fracture and disintegrate and divide into pieces. So that is what we mean by alternate wetting and drying. Then here we have frost action. Frost action happen in an Arctic environment, in a polar environment, where the form of precipitation in this 70 to 80% is in form of snow. And the rocks that are exposed in that environment, the snow fall on it. During the snow falling, the snow will deposit and converge to become what? Ice. When the temperature rises, this ice on top of the rocks will melt or thaw. There is what we call thaw. THAW. That is melt. The thawing of this ice on top of the rocks, some of these rocks, because they are exposed, some of them have cracks on their surfaces. Now, this ice will now surge into some of these rocks when they are converged. By the time they melt and they want to flow away, they begin to increase the cracks on the top of these rocks, which can eventually lead to the disintegration and broken down of these rocks into smaller pieces. Then finally, we talk about the action of plants and animals. This one is the activities of man, like mining, activities of man like construction, activities of man like farming, can lead to speed the rate of weathering. While that of animals, the hoofs of the animal can also speed, encourage weathering under physical. Then let's come to chemical. This chemical weathering is purely the alteration or the reaction between the chemical either in the air, the chemical in the water, and the chemical in the rocks if they come in contact. For instance, in terms of solution, when we have maybe a rock salt coming in contact with a chemicals, in the in the rainwater, it can alter the chemical component of the rock, which can lead to disintegration. It can weaken the rocks, which can lead to disintegration. That the rainwater attacking rock salt, that is calcium carbonate in terms of solution. When we talk about oxidation, is a reaction of oxygen in the air with minerals in the rocks. And once that one happened, it can lead to disintegration and broken down of rocks. Then when we talk about carbonation, this one involves the atmospheric carbon. Atmospheric carbon dioxide mixed with water to form a weak acid. That is carbonation. Atmospheric carbon in the air, coming in contact, with water to form a weak acid. Then we talk about hydration. Hydration involves, rocks, mineral absorbing water to alter their mineral constituent. Hydration. Rocks absorbing minerals to alter their own mineral constituent. And finally, we have hydrolysis. This is the reaction of water with rocks. The reaction of water with what? With rocks to produce entirely different rocks. So, in summary, when we are talking about chemical weathering, we are talking about the alteration of the chemical constituent of rocks as a result of their contact and reaction with other chemicals, either within the rain or within the atmosphere. So, in summary, we have discussed the types of weathering, the physical weathering and what? The chemical weathering. Finally, before we bring this topic to a close, we are going to look at mass wasting, because they goes together. Mass wasting. We said weathering or denudational processes involve the breaking down of rocks. When these rocks are broken down, either by physical or chemical means, do they remain there? No, they do not remain. They are carried from one point to another. The form of carrying these materials from where the weathering takes place to another point is what we call mass wasting. Mass wasting. Let me clean it. Now, let's look at mass wasting. As I said, that when denudation takes place, when weathering takes place, the rocks are broken down into pieces. These rocks that are broken down into pieces, they do not remain there. They are transported from one point to another. The process of transporting these materials, these broken down rocks, these weathered rocks, from the point that the weathering takes place to another point is what we call mass wasting. Then, let's look at factors that responsible or that encourage mass wasting, or factors of mass wasting. Number one, we have gradient of the slope. The steeper the slope, the more materials that are weathered on top of the mountain are being eroded to the down the slope. For instance, let's look at this. This is the top of the mountain. If you have a weathered material here, you see that the slope of this mountain is very steep. So a weathered material can roll down very quickly. So that is the gradient. The gradient of this slope is very high. The slope itself is very steep compared to maybe something like this. If you have a weathered material here, it will take a longer time for this material to come down the slope than material on top of this island. That is what we mean by the gradient of the slope. Number two, human activities. Human activities like mining, like construction, can help in transporting weather material from a place where it occurs to another place entirely. Human activities. Then number 3, nature and weight of the materials. It depends on the nature of the materials. If the materials weathered, they are light in terms of weight, it can easily be blown away, carried away to another place. But when it is heavy, it cannot easily be carried to another place. Then number 4, presence of vegetation can serve as a barrier. This mass wasting, it can be either by wind, it can be either by the action of ice, it can be either by the action of wave, it can be either by the action of rivers. Do you understand? But whenever we have the presence of vegetation that serve as obstruction, these materials may not be easily carried by this agent of denudation from one point to another. Now, let's look at types of mass wasting. That is the nature at which these materials can be carried from one point to another. Number 1, we have soil creep. That is, to creep. I think you have ever creeped before. They'll ask you, creep. Can you creep? Now, soil can creep on top of a steep or a gentle slope by the action of the lubricating action of water. Can make the soil a weathered materials to creep down the slope. Then we have soil flow. This one also looks like soil creep, but here the soil is more softer than the case of soil creep. The materials here are very tiny, smooth, fine, and once it gets in contact, it can change the phase to a semi-liquid materials that can be flown away to another side. Then here we have rock falls. This normally happens on top of an elevated land. It can be a hill, it can be a mountain where we have broken rocks, then be rolling down in succession. That is what we mean by rock falls. And this one we call the landslide. Landslide is also a disaster on its own whenever it happens, because this involve a block-like nature of the land disintegrating from each other and fall apart. That is what we mean by landslide. So we have discussed denudational processes, that is weathering, the breaking down of rocks into smaller pieces as a result of either the physical means or the chemical means. And once these materials are broken into pieces, they are carried from one point to another. This process of carrying it from one place to another is what we call mass wasting. So we are done with this thing.